I have been waiting to record this podcast with Marvin Storm for a long time, not just because his name is awesome and his last name is Storm, but because he has serious business knowledge that I think will help anyone listening to this podcast. He is an experienced businessman. He knows his stuff when it comes to business exits. He's done it a few times, and he knows business systems. I am a systems nerd, as you who listen to this podcast know, and a process nerd. So I'm going to probably geek out when it comes to this conversation, but just bear with us. It's going to be awesome. Hang in there. We'll have a good time. But first, I'm Micah Logan. This is The Common Sense Show.
You're listening to The Common Sense Show. If you've just started a new business, or if you're just thinking about it, this podcast is for you. Micah Logan has a stellar track record coaching small businesses to achieve six-figure revenue streams. The advice on this show is what has allowed him to have over 15 years of experience as an entrepreneur. Here is your host, Micah Logan.
Welcome to The Common Sense Show. And like I said in the open, we have Marvin Storm. Now, Marvin is quite the experienced businessman. Currently, Marvin is the host of the Business Exit Stories podcast. He is a founding. He had a stint with Deloitte and also founded a business with a partner after his stint with Deloitte. He eventually acquired a nationally based franchise company, repositioned it, scaled it, sold it. He abandoned the San Francisco area for Northern California, Sierra foothills, to slow down just a bit. How slow, Marvin? Well, I guess maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. But his podcast highlights heartbreaking stories of entrepreneurs that lost it all when they botched their exit, as well as some over-the-fence home run exits as well. He says that one of the saddest things that he witnesses is when entrepreneurs, many of whom spend decades working in their business, sometimes a lifetime, with the nose to the grindstone, they fail to develop a strategy to exit. So this is going to be quite interesting. Marvin, welcome to The Common Sense Show.
Oh, I'm looking forward to the discussion here. This should be good.
So, one of the things that I'm going to begin with this. One of the things that I noticed in business oftentimes is that the immense amount of effort that fledgling entrepreneurs and business owners put into starting a business, they do so with the hopes that they will get rich, attain extreme revenue. In some cases they do. And they almost never put time into thinking about their exit. Why do you think there's such a disparity between the focus on getting into business versus getting out of the business?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I've thought about this a lot. And since I have been around for a while, and have been a part of mentoring groups and sat on boards of directors of different companies, and have worked with the professionals in the exit space. What I've concluded over the years is that by nature, entrepreneurs are optimists. They're the ones that see the glass half full, even though circumstances and the dynamics of their current situation, stacks the cards against them. They have the ability to buckle down and push through all sorts of difficulties. And I think this sense of confidence that they have and the ability to kind of make something out of nothing gives them the, view as they look through the glasses to the world, the business world, that things are going to work out just fine. A number of years ago, I was a part of a kind of a roundtable discussion, and we were chatting about, scaling a business and all the challenges that different entrepreneurs in the group there had. And one of the more outspoken and vocal kind of senior members of this group, he was, I would imagine 15, 20 years older than I was at the time, made the statement that I've always remembered, and that is that if you build a good business, the exit will take care of itself. And I've often thought about that, and I think that's, again, this view that things are going to work out just fine. whether you plan for them or not. You're an entrepreneur, you control your destiny, and things are just going to work out, and they're going to work out for the best. However, that isn't what data shows us. The data shows us that more often than not, entrepreneurs, as you mentioned in your opening here, spend years, decades, sometimes an entire lifetime building a business, working hard, having their nose to the grindstone. And then on that last lap, they drop the baton and botch their exit. And it's really heartbreaking to see. And I on the podcast that I have, it's called Business Exit Stories. Those stories are shared, and some of the details behind why exits don't work out all that well. And so, I guess the answer to your question is that the reason that entrepreneurs sometimes just don't give consideration. The interesting thing is, they will spend hundreds of hours, thousand hours looking, researching, developing business plans and strategies and recruiting the right people to help them, and a few dozen hours thinking about their exit. And it defies comprehension, really, when you actually think about it. But it does happen all the time. More often than not, it happens.
One of the things that I found interesting about your bio, and one of the things, I do some small business consulting on the side, because again, if you're good at systems and strategies and building these things, then you can probably be a consultant. Was that you were looking, you had a plan, you moved up Northern California. It was for a life reason. And so one of the things that I talk about oftentimes, the first thing I talk about, not to dissuade individuals who are trying to start a business, but to crystallize it and to put it in perspective, is what do you want out of your life? Because the exit for a business pertains more to lifestyle than almost anything else, including what you do in your business. And, if these entrepreneurs started thinking about how they wanted their life to work out in the future, and maybe this is kind of existential for people who are getting in business, is not as logistical, but there's a combination of heart and mind in business. So, if they thought about their life and how they want their life to actually go, they would think more about their exit, therefore impacting what they did in the present than they maybe do. Do you find that there's like a gap of individuals thinking that far in the future about how they want their lifestyle to work out?
Oh, absolutely. I think take me, for example, the last exit that I had, went fairly well. And we had one of our kids that I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for a long time, and our children all moved out of the area into different states around the country, from New York to Southern California to Washington and Utah and Colorado and different places. Mm-hmm. And but we had a daughter that lived up in Northern California, in the Sacramento area. And so when I exited the business, and we wanted to see grandkids, and so we pulled up stakes and we moved to that area. And for my particular situation, I thought it was going to be just great to finally be able to sit back and enjoy life and do what I wanted to do. And I guess for some people that works. Mm-hmm. To pursue your passions, whatever those passions may be, golfing, fishing, traveling, whatever you wanted to do at, your post-exit, lifestyle that you want to build. But for me, I'm not a great golfer, mediocre at best. The only people I can manage to beat, is my grandkids, and that's not going to last very long. And I enjoy fishing and skiing. I love to ski, but you can only do so much of that, I found. And after a while, I just got the itch again to actually be doing something productive, to leverage my experience and the things I've learned over the years. And that's why I started doing the podcast, quite frankly, is that I just believed I had other things to share. And so my lifestyle, for me, and I come from an entrepreneurial family. I grew up with my father, had his own business, and I saw the lifestyle of an entrepreneur with the pluses and the minuses. And, but for me, I'm just not content, taking time and golfing and, skiing or, just sitting in a rocking chair. That's just not me.
Yeah.
And so my lifestyle is most enhanced when I'm giving back. Right now, I find tremendous joy and satisfaction in sharing information and knowledge with those that are still climbing the ladder, the entrepreneurial ladder, and on their own journey. And, to be able to, stand along the road and, coach them along, saying, you're going to get to a turn down there. You don't want to turn left. You want to continue to go right or go straight. And this is what you're going to see and find down the road here. And to me, there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction to be able to do that. And I'm using, just like you, I'm using a podcast to be able to do that. And I've gotten, so much positive feedback on this because it's shared in the context of stories, actual business exits from folks that are deal makers. They're the business brokers, the CPAs, the transaction attorneys, M&A advisors, mergers and acquisition people, specialists that share their war stories, the good, bad, and sometimes the really ugly transactions that have some heartbreaking outcomes. And it's and the benefit of that is that people listening to it don't have to make the same mistakes. They can learn from the mistakes of others.
It's a good format, actually, because as we all, as we know, for human history, stories are really, they affect a different type of part of your brain than logistics do. The way they're told illustratively, they affect your emotions a lot more. So you tend to remember stories more than you remember a data set, unless the data set evokes an emotion. Those are the things that kind of last. So I like the approach. So it seems like the individuals that you typically have on your podcast, these stories that you're talking about are from people who once have had businesses or practices or situations that were typically really high revenue and sold millions of dollars or whatever their widget was, or whatever their service was. And then they wanted to exit.
Not
Why?
necessarily. Yeah.
Or maybe they didn't. What put them in such a bind? Is there a commonality that put them in such a bind? Is it as simple as they just simply didn't think about it? Or is it more of something else that's contributed to the fact?
Well, certainly planning and thinking is a big part of it.
Sure.
But more than anything else, just like you're a process guy, systems guy, and if you figure out a methodology of how to do something and you document and train that methodology, you have a much higher probability of predicting an outcome. And it's basic common sense, really.
Well, one would think.
One would think. No one is going to go on a family vacation by just loading everybody up in the car and taking off, not knowing where they're going and making reservations at either hotels or campsites or RV sites or wherever you're planning to go.
Right.
And you sort of know how long you're going to be gone, and you know kind of what your budget is going to be and what you're going to see and do, and when you need to be back. That's just common sense. But yet business owners, these entrepreneurial optimists that believe that they can just, through the sheer force of will, force an outcome, don't give adequate decision or planning to, time an exit, because an exit is as much timing as it is anything else. Knowing when to exit and who you're going to target as the people to buy the business. All those things can be thought out, and there's a process to it. There's a methodology to it. And if you follow that process and methodology, you'll eliminate 70, 80%, 90% of the problems that surface when people attempt to sell or exit their business.
Does a lot of this in your mind go back to the thought of doing the the things that they don't desire to do in the business? Because it's funny, it's like not the little minutia type things that you hire someone to do, the 95% that someone else can do, not the 5% that you do, the heavy hitter stuff. But there's other stuff that's important as well, like professional bookkeeping, like understanding how to read a financial statement, understanding what your profit margins look like, understanding kind of how your systems affect your bottom line and how that affects your strategy for hiring and how that affects your future prognostication of how your business is going to do. Is ignoring these simple things, and they're not necessarily difficult, but they're just kind of tedious. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't want to deal with them because they're tedious, or they don't want to look at them because looking at a financial statement can hurt you because it can really tell you whether or not what you're doing is working or not working. Is glossing over that stuff also contributory to what the pain that they're feeling later?
Absolutely. You just listed off a checklist of things that are necessary to run a business profitably. All the things that you listed there are essential for any type of business to be able to control, manage, and scale their business. All of those things are essential. I mean, you started with bookkeeping and systems and margins and the types of things that you listed there, and it's no different than if you're going to exit. One of the things that I've found that's most useful, and I think that most entrepreneurs, business owners get, when they shift their mindset from being the business owner that is growing and scaling a business to understanding that at some point in time down the future, they're going to have to make a decision of what they're going to do with the business. They're either going to pass it on to someone in the family, they're going to pass it or sell it to a partner, employees. They're going to go out of business, fold up the tent and go home. Mm-hmm. And that happens more often than you would think. Or they're going to sell it to a third party, someone they don't know. And, 90+% of the time, it's going to be sold to someone you don't know.
Right.
And if that's the case, then if you get into the mindset and ask yourself, and I've done this, you ask some business owner, would you buy your business today in the shape that it's in today? Mm-hmm. Would you, if you were on the other side of the table looking at your business, would you buy it?
Right.
And what would you pay for it? And what terms would you offer? And I've had kind of the double take, when you ask that question, and it's kind of like the light bulb goes on and they get it. Oh, yeah, I get that now. Somebody that I don't know is going to be offering to take over my business and write me a check for it. How much are they willing to write that check for? What are they going to want to see when they buy the business? And when you shift to that mindset, then a lot of things just kind of clear up. Some of the mystery kind of goes away. All of the things that you mentioned there sort of make sense, because if they were buying your business, their own business, what would they want to see? And are those elements and components there today? And what is it going to take to get those components and elements in place so that someone on the other side of the table is going to feel comfortable and trust you and want to pay up, and maybe have multiple people on the other side of the table bidding against each other because it's such a good deal. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity is really great. And that's the type of mindset you have to get in.
I have a million questions, of course, but it's funny because I was listening to, I went to I'm in a mastermind, business mastermind. And there was a speaker there who is a small business consultant. He had done it for, I don't know, something like 40 years or something. And one of the things that he brought up was that, they went and they measured what makes a business owner successful. And so they said, well, is it IQ? And then they realized that there was no correlating factor between IQ and business success. And they said, was it?
Well, IQ is probably a negative indicator.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And then they said, was it EQ, emotional intelligence? And that wasn't a correlator in small business success. But what they found was it was AQ, or adversity quotient, the ability for someone to overcome, trials and tribulations throughout time in their past and in their present, and to regain their footing. And so an entrepreneur who continues to rebound from this adversity over time is more likely to be successful, assuming it doesn't take their legs out from under them, and to build back into something better. Do you think that entrepreneurs are addicted to the struggle? This is why they don't look at the profit margins and understand what it means, or even if they know what it means, or they don't want to look. Is there a reason why they become so blindfolded to things like margins and profitability, bottom line numbers?
Well, I think, the true entrepreneurial profile is a creative individual that has self-confidence, that, has the ability, as you say, the adversity quotient, to be able to push through things. Mm-hmm. Most entrepreneurs tend not to be very detail oriented. Mm-hmm. If you had 100 entrepreneurs in the room, and you could quantify, where their skill sets lie, most of them would not be numbers oriented. They would be much more creative oriented, problem solvers, being able to look around the corner and see opportunities where most people don't see opportunities. Mm-hmm. That tends to be more of the profile of a traditional, what we think of in this country as entrepreneurial. That's kind of the mindset of that group of individuals out there. The people that tend to be more numbers oriented, systems oriented, tend to be less entrepreneurial, as a general statement. Certainly that is not universal, but as a general statement. And so I think you see the reason that entrepreneurs really don't, spend all of their time making sure the bank is balanced, making sure that all the systems are documented. They're out in front of the train. They're leading the parade. They're adventuresome. They're problem solvers, and use different parts of the brain, as you alluded to earlier, for some of those problem solving capabilities. And so that is one reason I think that entrepreneurs need support. A true entrepreneur really needs a counterpart in his business someplace that is the operations person. The entrepreneur is generally the deal maker, the person that seeks out opportunities, that solves problems, that is creative and developing new ideas and things of that nature, and then executing them. He needs someone as a counterpart, either a general manager or a partner or a co-founder, or someone that takes care of the back office and takes care of the accounting and takes care of the systems and takes care of the HR and takes care of those type of things. So basically making sure the trains run on time. Not the engineer that's steering the train.
Right. And so I'm interested to know, I don't want to, so I have my own thoughts about when this should start, but I thought, when do you think that thinking about the exit begins? And I'm interested to know if your thoughts line up with mine. I'm pretty sure they do if I'm reading the tea leaves right, but you never know. I could be wrong.
Well, I mentioned earlier that this person that I bumped into in this roundtable discussion said, if you build a good business, the exit will take care of itself.
Mhm.
I don't believe that is generally true. I think that is a myth.
Mhm.
I think that great exits are a result of early planning. Some of the decisions you make early in the business, almost from inception,
Mhm.
uh, set that business on trajectory on what type of exit you're going to have. And so I don't think, a lot of things that you do to properly position a business for an exit can take place several years before. No, as soon as several years before you actually get to the point of exiting. But there are things that, if done early, a decade before, can position a business to eliminate a whole host of issues that come up when you're exiting. Case in point, I had on the podcast not too long ago a situation where when you are selling a business, regardless if it's a big business or a small business, there's kind of a checklist that the buyer or his counsel or people that are advising him go through. There's kind of a checklist, a due diligence checklist they go through to make sure that all of the aspects and elements of the business and information are understood and disclosed.
Right.
And one of the things that you have in that type of thing is intellectual property. If you have a company that has had software written and that software has not been done internally, it's been done externally, and software developers have built this software. And one of the things that a buyer will want to see is that you have all of the rights, for that intellectual property, that software and the code, that you own that, if that's a part of the purchase. And if you don't have that, it can bring things to a grinding halt, because sometimes the actual people that develop it are no longer around. And if you can't provide that, that creates risk for the buyer, meaning that at some point down the road, someone may raise their hand and say, that is my software program, that is my code. And if you can't provide that, that creates risk, and risk depresses value. Right. And changes the terms, and can be a real headache. At the time, you could have enormous amounts of money tied up in escrow to offset that down the road, or have to take a big discount in your price by just not doing that one simple thing of having that one piece of paper in the file, signed off, put away. And so when the person comes through the checklist looking for that thing, you pull it out and show it to them. Now that can take place 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before. And it's just one of those housekeeping things that most entrepreneurs just don't even worry about. They're just too busy running the business.
Yeah, that's something that I've thought about quite often. And I think about specifically this, what you mentioned about when to start planning, and you mentioned the beginning. And there's an amazing amount of clarity that comes with operationally when you have already thought about your exit and kind of what that might look like. And so I launched my franchise company this year. I didn't launch my franchise company this year for no reason. And you've been in franchising, so you played this game and you've won several times. But for me, I had already been in my domain for almost 20 years before I decided to franchise. And I decided to franchise recently as a part of my thought about the future, how I wanted to potentially exit. I have 2 children. My daughter's in high school now. My son's in middle school. There will be a time in the future where decisions have to be made regarding what I want to do. Do I want to inherit it to the business? To the kids, whatever the case is. And so, but I've never had more clarity surrounding operational execution or strategy than I did when I thought about my end when it came like to the franchise business, how I wanted to build it and everything else. And so it enabled me to, even if it's not necessarily word for word or position by position accurate, to build what I consider a mature franchise company that's royalty self-sufficient. And I mapped this whole thing out. But I would never have been able to do that had I not thought about what my exit potentially might look like. And so I'm really it's really amazing though that if entrepreneurs simply understood that by thinking about the kind of life, it starts with the kind of life you want to lead. If they understood what kind of life they wanted when they stopped working, or if they semi-stopped working, and how much money they would need to live that life, and what that life looks like in terms of enjoyment. And you've mentioned some of the things that you enjoy now and that you're doing. And if they understood what that lifestyle would cost them, then they get closer to what a number is that they need to sell a company for in the future. And it's obviously there's a lot more convoluted and complex things when it comes to strategizing for a business exit. But honestly, like this, the clarity that comes with knowing that you want to get out, it's actually relieving in a certain way, because you're not just kind of, fighting against the wind.
Well, I think you hit on something that's absolutely critical, is that when you know there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you know kind of a general horizon of when you are going to hit that mark, it makes the day-to-day much easier, because you're moving the ball down the court, and you know where the end zone is, and you know how you plan on getting to the end zone, to use a sports metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But it's absolutely true. You have given adequate thought to being able to scale the concept that you're building right now, and being able to, because franchising is no more than an expansion strategy for a concept. If you go back to the granddaddy of all franchises, McDonald's, that started back in the 50s, all Ray Kroc really ever did was use the operating model that the McDonald brothers had created to expand a brand. And that is just a way to accomplish a goal. Mm-hmm. And franchising can be a phenomenally successful expansion strategy to build a brand.
Yeah. So there are some key professionals that you need on your team when you're looking to exit. And one of the things that probably is overlooked in some cases is the expertise of actually the attorney. And I don't know whether it's just people assume because an attorney is an attorney and they have some certain level of perceived IQ or some professional expertise that they don't, a Juris Doctorate, that they can just handle anything. But can you speak to the results for your exit by having a high level professional team at your disposal, and what that might look? Yep. Go ahead.
It's absolutely critical, in my opinion. Your observation that, an attorney is an attorney is an attorney is about as far off the mark as you can get. Attorneys have, specialties. Mm-hmm. You don't want your family law attorney drafting your business agreements to sell. Because there's just too many nuances. There's too many technical issues with tax and basis and, covenants and not to compete and valuation issues and goodwill and a host of other things that a family law attorney has no clue about, absolutely no clue. And yet family attorneys are often drawn in because they are close to the family. They've been an advisor to the family for decades, and they make the assumption that it's a contract. I can draft a contract, and I had contract law in law school at some point, but no, a good transactional attorney that understands, the dynamics of a deal transaction is absolutely essential on both sides, both for the buyer and the seller.
Mm-hmm.
When you get a mismatch on either side, where you have, the seller that has a good contract attorney, transactional attorney that is skilled in business acquisitions and sales. And on the other side, you have the buyer that is using the family attorney. It's like oil and water. They don't even speak the same language, and it just runs up the bill enormously. I mean, for both parties,
Yeah.
because it goes back and forth and drafting and redrafting and arguing over terms. And when you have someone that just doesn't really know what they're doing, it is very expensive,
Mm-hmm.
not only from a fee base, but from the opportunity cost of being able to negotiate the right terms. Because the nuances of a by an acquisition agreement that's drafted properly, there is a ton of nuance in there that you have to get right in the language if things go sideways down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely 100% agree with that. You're absolutely right about that. And having that, M&A transactional attorney who has done this before, even though they're going to cost you maybe an extra $10,000 to get the transaction done, it's going to save you probably tens of thousands to have them as part of the team.
Yeah, it's really what you said there is absolutely true.
The so another question about valuation of the company. Before you reach the prelim agreement stage of a transaction, there's a lot of due diligence that happens. Attorneys should be retained during the due diligence period, obviously. How does those listening to this podcast may not even know where to start with business valuation, independent of what they think it's worth, which is 100 times gross revenue. If they're listening to this podcast, how does a business owner who's looking to exit their business, where do they seek proper valuation for their business so that it can be sold and that you have an argument or a leg to stand on in these negotiations with the buyer?
Well, it depends on the niche that you are in, the industry segment, the type of business that you're in, but there are standards within certain, verticals and in types of businesses that are generally accepted as a multiple of earnings. There are some, concepts and businesses that sell as a multiple of sales.
Mm-hmm.
It just really depends on, what type of business that you're in, of what the standard and what is traditional in that type of business. I want to make a point here is
Mm-hmm.
that you have basically two types of buyers in the market. You have financial buyers. Well, actually, I'll correct that. There's really three. There are owner-operator buyers that are going to buy your business and operate it and be the CEO, the person that takes over from the owner and runs that business as his own. You have that type of buyer. You have buyers that are financial buyers, and this is probably for businesses that are a little bit larger, that buy a business because they're adding to a portfolio of companies that they have. And so it's all about numbers. It's all about earnings and cash flow, free cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have strategic buyers. You have buyers that are looking to come into a certain geographical area. They may not have the specific type of expertise that they need for their customer base. They may have customers, 1,000 customers in their customer base, and they don't have a specific product or service that they can offer that customer. So they want to go out and acquire that product or that service. And they need that to add to their own customer base because they can generate more revenue and have happier customers. And so those are strategic buyers. So what a owner operator buyer will pay for a business, what a financial buyer will pay for a business is different, and what a strategic buyer will pay for a business is entirely different again.
Right.
The optimal type of buyer is someone that's strategic in nature. They want your business because they don't want to build what you have already built. They want to acquire what you have already, and they know that time and the ability to provide your product or service immediately after the acquisition to their own customer base has a lot more value than just adding additional revenue by buying your business. And those are the type of acquisitions that become extraordinarily profitable for those entrepreneurs that, are able to position and sell to a strategic buyer. And I got story after story, on the podcast that I have of people that have successfully done that. And it doesn't happen necessarily by chance. You just don't get lucky. You start thinking about it in advance, and you start thinking about who that buyer is going to be, and you start preparing your business for that type of buyer with that type of buyer in mind. Now, that buyer may not show up. You can't look into a crystal ball and understand and know what that buyer is going to be like, but you have a general idea, and the thought process that you go through and the things that you do and the decisions that you make in your business are different for each of the different types of buyers that you think may be interested in your business down the road.
I am so glad that you laid this out, because this is so important to selling your business, is, not just giving, oh, I'm going to sell it. Like, you don't just go to the market like Stop and Shop or Shaw's or, Food Line or whatever the grocery store is, find a buyer, put it on the shelf, and people just come and flock to it. You're absolutely right. And I think it's something that affects how you position your business in the marketplace, how you strategize your operation, ultimately how you even build your systems. Because if there's this strategic buyer in your domain, and by the way, they can share domains with you too, right? And be the same. They just want to expand into your market, so they can be, for instance, let's say in my space, this is not going to happen, nor that has it happened. Planet Fitness, let's say, they are a big box chain that builds facilities that are between 35 to about 55,000 square feet. They plan on having 100,000 members. They need that to be operationally successful. Let's say they wanted to get into the micro gym space, which is where my facility is. It's just starting to get traction in private equity right now, with investors from professional athletes to like Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So there's new money coming into the micro gym space. Let's say they wanted to enter this space. This is where I am. They could do so by essentially, in your statements earlier, by purchasing a company like mine. Once I built the concept out, deciding that they wanted to be in this space, having not ever operated in this space, we share the same domain, which is fitness, but they want that competitive advantage that you were talking about.
Well, they have a buyer build decision.
Yeah.
Do we want to build it? And when we're going to build something, it takes time to build it, and time is money. And they weigh the decision that in the boardroom of, they're looking at buy or build type of decision, that kind of strategy. Mm-hmm. They have to look how important it is to have it now.
Right.
And if they deem that, you are the target and have developed a great brand, and you have your systems in place, and you have your act together, and it's a well-run operation, it's much easier for them just to write the check and acquire you, because the day after the transaction closes, they can hit the street running. Right. And they can add it to their concept, and now have that other 100,000 people that you mentioned that members of, that facility, you mentioned Planet Fitness, if that's the concept you were thinking about, they can now offer this micro gym fitness experience to their customer base. And that's what I was referring to earlier, is that they will say, well, if it's going to take us 3 years to build this, and it's a lot of time and effort, and we have to invest and hire people, and we got to test the concept, and we got to install the systems, and we got to build the track record, and we got to figure out how to run the business. We got to do all those things, and that takes time and effort and money to do that. Or we can just acquire, this company out there that already has gone through 5-10 years of building this, and it is a smooth operating machine. It is better for us just to buy it. And we can afford to pay more for it because we already have a customer base we can offer this new product or service to. And we can recapture our investment in 18 months, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer. They will buy it instead of build it.
Now, there may be another expectation, though, for a seller of these businesses from their inevitable purchases, which is that, or their acquirers, which is that they may have to plan on staying on, assuming with a competitive advantage. If there's the institutional knowledge typically rests with the sellers, and it's not. I imagine that there's some amount of time where the executive team, or at least the CEO or founder, has to stay on anyways. Have you noticed a longer duration of the founder, owner, CEO, whatever, having to stay on board for this competitive acquisition versus the other, or is it all typically the same for you, all the same time period?
Well, you hit on something there that comes back to planning. There are some people that when they walk out of the closing room and the wire transfer hits their bank account, they want to be done with the business. They don't want to stay around. They're done. They're burned out. They're ready to move on, whatever the circumstances may be. And that becomes, a contested point in the negotiations of how long the founder or, CEO is going to stay on. If you plan it right and you set up your systems properly, where it isn't dependent on you being there, the founder, owner, operator of the business. If you set up your systems right, and so it isn't dependent on you being there, then there's really no reason for you to be there if you've done the right type of, planning and strategy and implementation and documentation and everything, and the right team that you've built. You are not necessary there. If you do that, there's no reason necessarily for you to be there, unless you want to be. There are some owners that this is their legacy. They want to make sure that the acquisition comes off properly, and they're willing to stay 6 months, a year and a half under a traditional employment agreement just to make sure that the transition goes smoothly. They take great pride in what they've built, and they want to stay around. Others, they're done. They want to move on. And so it depends on how you set the business up and what your personal motivations are when you exit. There are some that want a second bite at the apple. They want to retain equity in the acquired company. So
I was just about to ask you about this. Is this actually a growing trend with PE companies and venture, like right now, which is they're not actually acquiring 100% of these companies that you've I guess the answer ultimately I know is it depends.
Sure.
But is this a growing trend that you see, them not actually acquiring 100% equity in companies at the moment?
Well, if the founder, owner, CEO is essential to the operation of the business, and they have a lot of institutional or product knowledge or understanding of the market that the acquiring company does not have, the acquiring company, whether it's private equity or a larger company, may want, it is best to have the genius creator stay on to provide that strategic insight that has taken decades to get and build. And they're more than willing to give up equity because in their view, if you have someone that has a vested interest in the future success of what you've just acquired and is willing to stay on, that's the best equity that they can have, vested equity into the future success. And so they're more than willing to, give that up because they view, let's just pick a number as 20%. They will allow the founder to retain a 20%. And they're going to buy 80% of the entity. And that founder stays on with a 20%. And he will work really hard for that 20% to grow and to multiply. And so if just put yourself in their situation, if you were acquiring your company, would you be willing to give up 20%, pay for 80% of it, but have the founder there for a 20% stake in the company? Because every dollar that he increases in value, he's going to get 20 cents of that dollar, but you're going to get the balance, you're going to get the other 80% of that growth.
Right.
And so you would want someone to stay and have an equity interest. I was just talking to someone yesterday, actually, that's going to be we were doing a pre-interview for an upcoming episode on it. And he was sharing a story on how in an 18-month period of time, the founder sold out and retained, in this case, it happened to be 18% of the company that he sold. He maintained an 18% interest in his company. Less than a year later, the company that acquired him got acquired. Okay.
Wow.
And he multiplied, it was 3.5 times. He got 3.5 times on that 20% or that 18% equity that he maintained. In less than a year, that was multiplied by 350%. Because, and so, he could have sold out and cashed out and went away, but that 20%, and I'm just going to use, let's say that 20% was, for illustration purposes, $100,000, just for an example here. It was much more than that, but it was $100,000. So he got, in a year, that $100,000 of equity that he retained in that company turned into $350,000 in less than a year. Pretty good return on investment.
I would say so. So he essentially got back. I can't even believe this. So he got back an additional 60% of what he sold the company for initially, right? He made that again in his.
So he took some chips off the table.
Right.
Initially.
Yeah.
For his 83%.
Right.
He got paid for that, and that was in cash. He got paid for that. He got an employment agreement to stay on. And he maintained that 18% equity in the company. And that 18% was multiplied 3.5 times in less than a year. It's because that's just what that's an unusual circumstance.
Sure.
But that comes back to thinking about, what you want to accomplish. Right. In his specific case, this didn't happen by chance. It just wasn't good luck. He thought about it like you're thinking about it, and like your audience should be thinking about it. They should be thinking about it way in advance of how they're going to exit. That's the bottom line, is that you may get lucky. It's like going to Las Vegas. You go to the roulette wheel and you pick a number, either black or red, or you pick a number and you roll it. You may get lucky and do very well. The probability is you're not going to be that lucky.
Right.
But if you plan it, you can make luck happen if you plan it right.
So for all those listening to this podcast right now, I just did the math, quick math. 63% is what he ended up with of his original amount, which is unbelievable. Well, really the new amount, if they sold for even more to get their money back. And it wasn't a fire sale. So that's something to emulate. It's probably like trying to find the wild Yeti in in the, in the Himalayan mountains. But it's something that I think you raise a good point about planning. And I think there's this misnomer that you have to be an expert to plan your exit, and you don't. You just have to have essentially a plan about what you want to do later and kind of what you want your business to look like at full maturity. And then you have to work every day, step by step, to get to what you think your business looks like at full maturity. And full maturity for every business is different. For my franchise, is different than the companies that you've sold in the past. But I generally know, and it doesn't have to be exact, because other than God,
things are going to change.
Who knows? Yeah.
If there's anything that's certain about business, as any owner out there knows, is that things change, and they change rapidly sometimes and unexpectedly. And when you start talking about planning an exit, things are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to be pointed in the right direction. That's the point.
Yeah. No, I love it. That's a great story. Marvin,
so your point a little earlier there, where you say, it doesn't take a genius. These are common sense type of things that you do to plan your exit. But you should surround yourself with good advisors,
mm-hmm.
People that, can mentor you, or you can ask questions of, because for most people, when it comes to an exit, you're going to get that one time at the plate.
Mm.
And you don't want to go, 3-0, you're striking out. You
Right.
just don't want to strike out when everything depends, or a lot depends on that exit. You want to make sure that you've given it adequate thought, consideration, and a little bit of pre-planning to get to that point. If you do, an interesting statistic here that most of you, we all hear the statistics that within 5 years after you start a business, 80% or so businesses fail. And then in the next 5 years, 80% of those businesses fail. The longevity of startup businesses isn't that great. The interesting statistic is that you never hear about, or generally don't hear about, is that for all of the businesses out there in the country that are going to be sold, over 80% of them never get sold.
Wow. So these are the ones.
That's a sobering statistic. That means people walk away from them, they go bankrupt, they just can't find a buyer, and they end up winding it down or whatever. That 20% are the ones that actually get sold. And so just give that some thought. You don't want to be a part of the 80%. You want to be a part of the 20%. And it's not that difficult. The point is that if you do the right things, you can make almost any business saleable.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And that's an excellent point, actually. And I think that those sobering statistics are important because, frankly, you said, I think we opened our discussion with you talking about the spirit of an entrepreneur and how positive they are and optimistic. And, we see things through a certain kind of glasses. And sometimes that includes what we think our business is and how much we think our business is worth. And ultimately, at some point, entrepreneurs have to call themselves back to the center and kind of focus on what the deal is in front of them, because that deal may never come again, or an acquirer may never come again. And, I'm sure in some cases emotion creeps in and they're like, I know my business is worth $3 million. And it's like, I know it. And then a person who's coming in looking at your numbers are like, well, why do you think it's worth $3 million? And there's this massive disconnect between what your business so the purpose of financial statements are to tell a story about your business. What story are these things telling in your systems and processes? And versus like the entrepreneurial mind, which is what you think the story your business tells. And so in their head, they're thinking about the founder story. They're not thinking about the financial story. And the people who have the money to acquire your business are thinking about the financial story of your business more so than the founder story. They may think the founder story is nice, but it's not going to bring more customers in after they buy your business. They want to make sure it works at the end of the day.
Well put.
Marvin, we're bumping up against our time here. this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I nerd out on it. I've, look, I'm a young guy. I'm 38, and I grew up in the city, so I've never had business mentors. I've never had anyone specifically guiding me in business. I don't have a legacy in my family of business owners, anything like that. So when I have the opportunity, from being self-educated with most stuff in business, like most entrepreneurs are, to speak to someone like yourself with experience in this particular domain and expertise, who talk to people all day long who are selling their businesses successfully or unsuccessfully in some cases, I cherish the time, because this is a really important point for entrepreneurs who are really trying to do the right thing by their business and their families. Creating generational wealth is a serious task, and it takes an enormous effort to do so.
Now, for your audience out there, I get a lot of feedback from people that listen to my podcast on, how do I go about this? So I created a report, and if any of your audience wants that, just to have them go to businessexitstories.com/report, and they can download this report that gives them, kind of a broad overview of some of the key things that they need to think about. So I found that to be very useful for folks that are just starting to think about this topic.
What was the website again? One more time.
businessexitstories.com/report.
Awesome. And so what I'll do is I will put the link to your podcast and the report in the description of the show notes, so that our audience can access it. And so they can kind of get that information. And if they want to reach out to you because they have an exit story that they want to share with you and to see if it's worthy of your podcast, or if they want to get more information in general, consult with you, is that something that you do? And how can they?
Sure, they can just go to Business Exit Story, this mstorm at businessexitstories.com, and just get a hold of me that way, or they can reach me on LinkedIn. Also, Marvin L. Storm is my LinkedIn handle.
Awesome. Well, Marvin, thank you for spending some time with me today. And I'm sure the international audience and those listening will appreciate.
This has been great. I'm excited for your concept and that you've started to franchise it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you're able to expand and grow and scale it and position it for that eventual exit to a strategic buyer.
Yes, that's right. To a strategic buyer. That's absolutely
where you maintain 20% and then you get 10 times that amount on an exit a year later. That's the plan. That's the plan. In the interest of full transparency, about 80% of that was my plan already. The 20% about gaining back the equity, and 100% of the new equity was never my plan, but now I can't know that and not try for that. So let's try for that. This has been great. I've enjoyed it.
I've had a fun time too. Thank you, Marvin. And I look forward to maybe having you back on the podcast. And after we've scaled a little bit and kind of telling you the story a little bit and seeing what your thought is on that.
All right. Well, delightful to be with you today.
Take care.